Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. My hands were sweating. I hadn't seen most of these people since my father's funeral, but here I was, surrounded by family. The same people who had spent years ignoring me, avoiding me, or worse, using me. James Blackwell, my dad's lawyer and old friend, stood at the front of the room, a solemn expression on his face as he flipped through the pages of the will. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. And then he said it. You, Robert Thompson, are the sole heir to your father's estate. Your inheritance will include $20 million, full control of his conservation land and his primary residence. The room froze. My sister's jaw dropped. I caught her eyes as her head snapped toward me, wide with disbelief. The color drained from her face. Her husband, Peter, looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. He stared at me like I had just sprouted horns. My ex-wife, Michelle, didn't even blink at the announcement. She just stared at me with that look she gave me all those years ago, the one that said she was still trying to figure out why she ever left me. I kept still, hands still clammy, but glued to my sides. They didn't know what was coming. They thought they had won just by showing up, but I knew better. I knew the bomb was about to drop. Everything stays as it has been, with one exception, Blackwell continued, his eyes scanning the room. Your father made it very clear that control over the land will now be placed in a trust. The terms of the trust are to ensure that the estate remains intact for future generations and is protected from external interests. I saw the color return to my sister's face, but it was a deep shade of red. I could almost hear her thoughts spinning. She had always been the one to chase titles and appearances, the one who married well, the one who spent every penny she made trying to live up to the image of success. But she wasn't prepared for this. For me. Blackwell went on. The family company, Thompson Enterprises, will remain in your hands, Robert. The others will have no say in its future. That was the real shocker. The company. My dad had built it from the ground up, turning it from a small construction business into a massive real estate empire. Everyone thought it would go to my sister. After all, she'd been working for the company for years, trying to climb the corporate ladder, making nice with every client who could increase her social standing. But no, Dad had made sure every piece of land, every building, every investment was in my hands. I let that sink in, watching the reactions of the people around me. My sister's face twisted with anger, while Peter's expression was hardening, his lips tightening. My ex-wife was staring at me, an odd mixture of longing and disbelief in her eyes, like I had done something that didn't quite add up. She didn't know whether to be proud or furious. And then the final bomb. Blackwell reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope, sealing it with a wax stamp. He handed it to me with a knowing look. Your father's final letter, he said, his voice low. He wanted you to have this. I felt the weight of the envelope in my hand, and for a moment, everything else in the room faded. My ex, my sister, the lawyer, none of them mattered right now. My father's words, his final thoughts, were waiting for me inside this envelope. I tore it open, and as I began to read, I heard Blackwell's voice again. Use this wisely, son. You have everything you need now. I trust you. I exhaled slowly, looking up at the faces in front of me. The faces of people who had spent years either ignoring me, dismissing me, or taking advantage of me. Now, they were about to see what true reckoning looked like. My father hadn't just left me money. He had left me something far more valuable, the power to change everything, and I intended to use it. Every single bit of it. I grew up in Boston, but I never really lived like most kids did. Mom bailed when I was 10, and after that, it was just me and my dad. Jerry Thompson. He wasn't the type of man you'd see on TV, not flashy or eager to climb social ladders. He was a simple guy, a hardworking man who ran a construction business that over the years turned into a real estate empire. But he wasn't interested in any of that show-off stuff. Like, he drove a rusted-out F-150 and wore a $40 watch until the day he died. I remember he used to say, money's just a wrench, kid. You don't worship it. You use it to build. And that's what he did. He built things. Not just buildings, but a life, for me, for himself. And unlike my sister, who chased titles and status, I didn't need fancy things to feel good about myself. I wasn't about impressing people. I fixed cars in high school. My hands were always covered in grease. When I wasn't working on engines, I was out on job sites, learning the ropes of construction. I didn't need a degree to prove I was smart. Hell, my dad never even finished high school. He always told me that what mattered was doing the work. The hardest worker in the room gets the job, not the guy who can talk the most. My sister Carol, on the other hand, was different. She was always about appearances. From the moment she could walk, she wanted to be seen. College, promotions, high-end clothes, flashy parties. She chased status, while I just wanted a solid paycheck and my hands on a set of wheels. Back then, I never felt the need to compete. Dad and I spent every Sunday together. We'd do oil changes on the F-150, watch Red Sox games, or head up to his place in New Hampshire to fish. Those days were simple. There was something grounding about being with him, about learning what it meant to work for something that had real value, not just a dollar sign. I think he tried to teach me more than he ever realized. It wasn't just about business. It was about living with integrity. He would say, don't do things to impress people. Do them because it's right, because it builds something good. That's why after high school, when my sister and her friends were talking about business school and dad suggested I take a job with him in the company, I turned it down. I didn't want to follow the corporate grind. I had my own path. I had the shop. I had my hands in something I loved. But Carol didn't see it that way. I remember the day she asked me why I wasn't interested in taking over the family business. You could be running this place by now, she said, sipping her latte in the kitchen, all polished and put together, like I was just supposed to follow in her shiny footsteps. You could have a better life, not get your hands dirty every day, she said, like it was a favor. Dad heard the conversation. He was quiet for a while, standing at the counter, sorting through some paperwork. Your sister's right, he said, his voice soft. But you don't have to do it just because she says so. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you choose to live your life. It stung, but it wasn't just about turning down a job. It was about the way they saw me, a mechanic, a guy who worked with his hands, not their idea of success. But for me, it wasn't about titles. It was about pride in my work. I remember the last conversation we had before my dad got sick. It was right after Carol came by with her lawyer, asking if he was ready to start sharing the business. She'd been borrowing against the family's assets for years, thinking she was entitled to more than what she had. That's how it was with her, always pushing for more. I'm not doing this for you or Carol, my dad said as we sat together on the porch. I'm doing it because you'll know what to do with it. You don't need any handouts. I'm not leaving you this for the fancy car or the nice clothes. You've already got the tools to make something out of it. And that's what I want you to do. Build something. Don't worry, Dad. I'll take care of it, I said, though I wasn't sure what that even meant at the time. I just want you to rest. But he knew. He knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't squander it. That night, as I sat beside him in the quiet house, he said, I'm not giving you a handout. I'm giving you tools. Tools to do something real with your life. So don't screw this up. At that moment, I didn't understand the weight of his words. But now, sitting in that law office, I felt the burden of them. Carol and Peter thought they had everything figured out. They thought I was just going to get the money and walk away. But they didn't know my dad like I did. The tools weren't just for business. They were for me to build something with purpose, something that meant more than just profit, something that made a difference. And now, as I looked around the room at my sister's stunned face and Peter's red cheeks, I realized they had no idea what was coming. They thought they were cashing in early, but my dad had already kept the receipts. When Dad's cancer hit hard last year, everything else in my life came to a screeching halt. I closed down my auto repair shop, packed up my tools, and moved into his house to help. It wasn't an easy decision. The shop was doing well, I had regular customers, and the bills were paid. But what did any of that matter if my dad was dying? He needed me. So I put my life on hold, figuring I could always reopen the shop later. I didn't mind. Not really. The hardest part wasn't the long nights or the constant reminders that time was running out. It wasn't even the chemo treatments or watching him slowly lose his strength. It was the fact that my sister and her husband barely came by. Carol would show up once in a while, but it was always with her lawyer in tow. She'd poke around at the estate documents like they were some kind of treasure map, trying to get a leg up on the business before Dad was even gone. I'll never forget the night Dad pulled me aside and told me what was really going on. They've been borrowing against what they think's theirs for years, he said, his voice rough and tired. It's been getting worse lately. She's been draining the business accounts, pretending it's for the family, but it's just her lifestyle, her damn shopping trips, and now she wants it all. I just nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. I'd seen the signs. Over the years, Carol had become more and more distant from me, more and more obsessed with appearances and social standing. She was always too busy to care about the things that mattered, things like working hard, staying grounded, building something real. But I didn't say anything. Dad didn't need to hear more complaints. He was exhausted enough as it was. I'm not giving her a dime, he added, spitting the words like they were poison. She's had plenty. I've enabled her, and I won't do it with you. I won't give you a handout either, but I'll give you something real. Tools, a foundation, and a damn good opportunity to make something of it. I sat with him in the dimly lit living room, the weight of his words sinking in. I won't let her take it all, he said with a finality that told me he wasn't joking. I know, Dad, I replied, gripping the arm of my chair. I'll make sure she doesn't. The rest of the months were a blur. I kept my head down, taking care of everything I could while Carol and Peter continued their slow circling around the estate. They thought they were playing a game, but Dad wasn't going to let them win. He knew exactly what they were up to. It wasn't until the end of the summer that Dad started to show real signs of giving up. His body had grown too weak, too frail. One afternoon, he asked me to take him out to the garden. It was something he'd always loved, sitting out there surrounded by the flowers he'd spent years tending to. We didn't talk much that day, just sat in silence, watching the bees buzz around the blooming lavender. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. He turned to me after a long while. Son, he said, voice raspy, I'm sorry about all this. I know it's been hard, but you've done right by me. You're the only one who has. I'll always take care of you, Dad, I replied quietly, not sure what else to say. He shook his head, a tired smile tugging at the corners of his lips. No, you don't get it. I've done a lot of things in my life, but I've never been more proud of you than I am now. Not because you've been here for me, but because you know what it means to build something, to make something real. His eyes were glazed over, but there was clarity in his words. He wasn't just talking about the shop or the land. He was talking about integrity, about values that he wanted me to carry on. They're going to try and take it all, he murmured, his voice growing quieter. But it's yours, son, not theirs. I trust you. Don't let them tear this apart. I nodded. I didn't have the heart to argue or assure him that everything would be fine. All I could do was sit there, knowing this was the last time I would hear him say these things. A few days later, he slipped away. No grand final words, no big moments of clarity, just a soft passing in his sleep, his hand in mine. It was over, just like that. But it wasn't really over. Not for me, not for Carol. I'd spent so many years running my shop, keeping my head down, always trying to do right by my family. But now, with Dad gone, things had changed. I had everything he'd left behind. The company, the land, everything. And it was time to do things my way. As the days passed after the funeral, Carol and Peter kept showing up, pretending to mourn, acting like they cared. But I saw through it. They wanted control. They wanted the estate to be theirs, but they had no idea how hard it was going to be. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Dad had given me more than just money. He'd given me the tools to protect what he had built, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. They thought they were cashing in early, but they had no idea what they were about to face. The reckoning was coming, and this time they wouldn't win. It was a crisp fall morning when we gathered in James Blackwell's office to read Dad's will. The smell of polished wood and old leather filled the room as I sat across from my sister Carol and her husband Peter. Michelle was sitting beside me, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked on the floor. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Blackwell was calm, collected, his face neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the subtle signs of nervousness. He was holding something important in his hands, the future of the Thompson estate. Before we proceed, Blackwell began, his voice steady, let me remind you that all of this was carefully planned and drafted by Mr. Thompson with very specific intentions. He looked over at me, almost as if seeking confirmation. I nodded once and he began reading aloud. Firstly, I bequeath all personal property, real estate holdings, and all liquid assets to my son, Robert Thompson. I glanced over at Carol, just in time to catch her eyes widen in disbelief. Peter shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers tightly gripping the armrests. Robert will retain full control of the company, Thompson Enterprises, and all assets associated with it. The family home, as well as the conservation land, will be placed under his management. Blackwell continued, but the words blurred together. My mind was focused on the reaction around me. Carol's face had gone red, her lips tight with frustration, but she didn't interrupt. Peter, on the other hand, had his mouth set in a tight, angry line. Then Blackwell dropped the bomb. Finally, he said, his voice ringing through the room, the remainder of the estate will be placed in a trust to ensure that Robert maintains complete authority over the assets. Carol, you will receive a one-time cash inheritance of $120,000. Peter, you will receive nothing. There was a brief silence. For a moment, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. And then Carol erupted. This is absurd, she shouted, slamming her fist onto the table. You can't be serious, Dad. You knew I was the one who worked for the company. You knew I've been handling things for years. This isn't fair. Her voice broke as she stood, her hands shaking in fury. I've spent my whole life trying to help keep this family afloat, and now you're giving everything to him? Everything. Peter, silent until now, stood up too, his face flushed with rage. He pointed at me across the table. This is manipulation, he accused. You've been working behind our backs, pulling the strings all along. I didn't let him finish. No, I said firmly, cutting him off. You've been stealing from this family for years. You've been living off Dad's generosity, thinking it was yours for the taking. But it wasn't. And now you're angry that it's finally caught up with you. I paused, letting the words sink in. I knew what was coming next, and I couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when they realized just how far Dad had gone to make sure they didn't take a single thing that wasn't earned. Carol, I said, turning to her, my voice steady but cold, you've borrowed against the company's assets without any authorization, and you've been spending money like it's yours, not caring about the long-term consequences. I know about the loans you've taken out, about the credit lines you've opened under Dad's name, about everything. Her face drained of color as she stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words. And Peter, I said, now facing him, you've been siphoning funds from the company, funneling money into your own personal accounts. I've got the proof right here. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't just the will. It was a file, packed with documents, emails, and evidence that showed exactly what they'd been doing. Every last piece of it. I placed it on the table between us, and both of them recoiled, eyes wide with panic. Blackwell, still calm, raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. He knew what was coming, and he wasn't going to get involved. Carol was shaking now, her face an ugly mix of rage and fear. This is insane, she whispered. You're trying to ruin everything. I gave her a small smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. No, Carol, I'm trying to fix it. This family's been broken for a long time, and it's time for the truth to come out. Robert, please, Peter said, his voice low as if trying to reason with me. We're family. You don't need to do this. Let's just talk about it. You don't need to be this way. No, I said, standing up slowly. I've given you every chance to do the right thing, and instead you've used this family and my father as your personal piggy bank. You're not family anymore. Not to me. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their shock hanging heavy in the room. Blackwell cleared his throat, and I turned to him, my focus sharp. James, I said, the trust. I want it activated. I want them cut off right now. Everything. No more access. No more loans. And if they want to contest anything, I'll make sure they have the legal battle of their lives. The finality of it hit them like a punch to the gut. Carol slumped back into her chair, her face pale, and Peter stood frozen, his mouth working, but no words coming out. You're done, I said coldly, looking at them both. I've already won, and you've lost. I looked around the room, my heart still pounding, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the world shift off my shoulders. You've already had more than enough, I finished, my voice quiet but resolute, and with that I stood and turned to leave. There was no more room for them in my life. No more room for the people who thought they could take advantage of me. This was my time. My inheritance wasn't just money, it was the reckoning, and it had only just begun. The house felt different when I walked in that afternoon. It was too quiet, as if the storm that had just passed hadn't left anything behind. The air was still thick with the weight of the will reading, the way my family had looked at me, the tension that seemed to crackle between us all. But it was over. They thought they could tear everything apart, but I had seen it all coming. I had planned my move, and now I had control. As I made my way through the front door, I found Carol and Peter waiting for me in the study, the same place we'd spent so many hours discussing business deals, estate planning, and pretending to be a family. They were sitting on opposite sides of the room, their eyes cold, but their bodies tense, like they were just waiting for me to make a wrong move. "You don't have to do this, Robert," Carol said, her voice tight, her hands clasped together in front of her as if she were trying to control the shaking. "You've won. You've taken everything." I just looked at her. She didn't get it. She still didn't understand. Peter shifted in his seat beside her, his jaw clenched. "Yeah," he muttered. "We've lost, okay? But that doesn't mean you have to be so damn cruel. It's not enough to take it all from us. You have to rub our faces in it." I couldn't stop myself from smiling. "Cruel? You think what I'm doing is cruel?" I walked across the room and set my briefcase down on the desk with a quiet thud. It was time to drop the bomb. "No," I said, picking up the envelope that was still sealed with my father's personal seal. "What's cruel is watching you both walk in here with your hands out, pretending you cared. You spent years bleeding this family dry. Now it's over." They were silent. Carol's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking to Peter, who was staring at me like he wanted to strangle me with his bare hands. I didn't care. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the check inside. A ceremonial check for $20 million. The number was enormous, the kind of number people dreamed about. It was the thing they had wanted most of all. They thought they'd won, but they were wrong. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just held the check up in front of them, watching the confusion flicker across their faces as they tried to figure out what I was doing. "What the hell is this?" Peter finally asked, his voice low. "A decoy," I said, my voice steady. "I had it made just for today. I wanted to see how far you'd go." "What are you talking about?" Carol asked, leaning forward, her voice tight with anger. "You thought that by burning bridges with me, you could walk away with everything, didn't you?" I shook my head, a smile playing at the corner of my lips. "You thought if you cut me out, if you played dirty enough, you'd end up on top. You didn't count on one thing." I paused, letting it sink in. "You didn't count on the fact that I knew what you were doing all along." Carol's face flushed, her breath catching. "What the hell does that mean?" she spat. I chuckled, folding the check in half and holding it up to her, watching her eyes widen. "It means the real money is already secure. The money isn't tied to this house or these checks. That check?" I nodded at the one in my hand. "It's nothing. Just a symbol, a test. And now, thanks to you, it's going up in flames." Before either of them could say anything, I reached for the lighter on the desk. The one I'd carried in my pocket for years, a small silver thing I had kept as a reminder of my own choices. I flicked it open with a practiced motion, watching the flame flicker to life. Carol's eyes grew wide as she stood up, her voice rising. "You're crazy, Robert. You can't burn that. That's our future. You can't just throw away 20 million. "I can," I said, my voice cold. "Because it's not about the money. It never was. It's about watching you both realize that you had nothing in the first place. You can't take what doesn't belong to you." With that, I set the corner of the check on fire, holding it steady as the flames began to lick at the edges, curling up and eating the paper in a slow, methodical burn. The fire caught quickly, the check curling and blackening as it shriveled in the heat. "No!" Peter shouted, leaping to his feet. "You're insane! You can't just do this." But it was too late. The check was already consumed by the flames. All that was left was ash floating up in the air between us. a metaphor for everything they had tried to take from me. "You're too late," I said, watching the fire burn out, the smoke rising in the air. "That was never the money, Carol. It was never the check. It was about the truth." "What truth?" she asked, her voice strained. "The truth is," I said, meeting her eyes, "that you never had a claim on this family's future. You thought you could manipulate it. But the truth is, the real inheritance is in the lessons Dad taught me. And they're worth far more than anything money could buy." I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us before I spoke again. "The money? It's already been moved to a secure trust. All you get now is this." I picked up the charred remains of the check and tossed them onto the floor in front of them. Carol and Peter just stared at it, their faces frozen in disbelief. "You've already lost," I said, my voice quiet, "and you won't get another chance." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them behind, watching as their world came crashing down. I wasn't going to save them anymore. Not now. Not ever. This was the reckoning. And it was just beginning. I barely made it to the front door when Blackwell's assistant called me back into the study. She looked pale, almost frantic. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "there's a situation. Your sister and her husband are—" I didn't need her to finish. I could hear the raised voices from the hall, and when I turned back into the room, I saw Carol and Peter standing there, arguing with Blackwell. The anger was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "I don't care what you say," Carol shouted at Blackwell, her face flushed with rage. "You can't just let him do this. It's not legal. We'll fight this. We'll fight him in court." Peter was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "We'll find a way to fix this. Just wait. We can't let him have everything. Not like this." I stepped back into the room slowly, deliberately, leaning against the doorframe, watching the chaos unfold. I had no intention of going through this mess again. Not with them. Not now. "Enough," I said, my voice calm but firm. Carol whirled around to face me, eyes wild with fury. Peter, catching sight of me, straightened, his face contorting into something that looked like a mix of disbelief and anger. "You?" Carol started, pointing a trembling finger at me, but I cut her off. "No," I said, my tone sharp enough to silence her. "It's over. You had your chance to walk away with something. But now, you're going to leave, both of you. I've already made the calls. You're done here." Their expressions froze. Peter blinked, trying to understand what I was saying. Carol opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. "I don't care what you think you're entitled to anymore. It's done. You're leaving. Now." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Carol's jaw clenched, and I could see the rage brewing in her, just waiting for an outlet. She was about to explode, but before she could, Blackwell stepped in. "Robert's right," Blackwell said, his voice calm but resolute. "The documents are clear. Everything has been shifted to his control. There's no going back from this." Carol opened her mouth, about to shout again, but she faltered, her gaze darting to Peter. He shot her a look, one that almost seemed like a silent plea to keep it together, but neither of them had anything left to say. "Are you going to throw us out?" Peter finally spat, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. "I'm not throwing you out," I replied. "You're free to go, but you're not welcome here anymore. This isn't your home, and this sure as hell isn't your company." At that, Carol snapped. "You." She never finished the sentence. Blackwell, always the professional, moved quickly, stepping between us as he motioned for two security guards who had been waiting outside. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Thompson from the premises," he said calmly, his eyes never leaving mine. The guards, both tall and imposing, entered the room silently. They didn't need to say a word. One of them approached Carol, the other stepped toward Peter. They didn't touch them, but the intent was clear. It was time for them to leave. Carol's face turned a shade darker, but the guards didn't budge. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned toward Peter. "You can't do this, Robert," she shouted, her voice breaking. "This is our family's legacy. You're throwing it all away. I hate you." Her words stung, but only for a moment. I stood there, silent, watching her as the security guard placed a firm hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the door. "You'll regret this," Peter muttered as the guard nudged him forward. "You'll see. This isn't over." I didn't say anything. I just watched them leave, my heart beating faster with every step. They were gone. No more arguments. No more manipulations. No more pretending they had a right to anything here. As the door closed behind them, Blackwell turned to me, a look of approval in his eyes. "Well done, Robert. That's one problem handled." I nodded, though the adrenaline was still rushing through me. The weight of the moment hadn't fully sunk in. It felt like the world had shifted, and I was finally in control. But I knew this wasn't the end. Carol and Peter were gone for now, but they'd be back. The fight wasn't over. They'd try to turn the family against me. They'd try to get their hands back on what was mine. But I was ready for them. "No one gets to walk over me anymore," I muttered under my breath. "Not ever again." Blackwell nodded. "I'll make sure everything's handled. You'll be in the clear." I shook my head, turning toward the window, staring out at the sprawling property my father had built. "I've already handled it," I said, more to myself than to him. "This is just the beginning." And as the last of my family was escorted out, I knew it was true. The battle was over, but the war, that was just starting. 1 week later, I found myself back at the house. It felt strange to be here alone, standing in the middle of the living room where family had once gathered. The echoes of laughter, the clink of glasses, the false pretenses, they were all gone now. All that remained was the silence. Dad's journals were still in the study, tucked away in a drawer. I'd spent the past few days going through them, slowly piecing together the man he'd been beyond the stern exterior. It wasn't just about the company, the land, or the money. It was about the mission. Dad had always been about preservation, of family, of values, of the things that truly mattered. And it was clear now that he'd left me something far greater than just a fortune. He had left me a legacy, a mission. I wasn't going to squander it. I looked around the house, taking in the empty spaces. It had been Dad's dream to turn the property into something that could make a real difference. He had spoken about it so many times, the land he wanted to preserve, the way he wanted to give back to the community. He wasn't interested in luxury or extravagance. He wanted to create something with purpose, something lasting. It was a nonprofit, the Thompson Land Trust. And it wasn't just some pie-in-the-sky idea. It was a vision Dad had started years before he got sick. He'd outlined it all: the veterans program, the wildlife preservation efforts, the community outreach. All of it was there, in black and white, waiting for me to take the reins. I pulled out the old blueprint from Dad's desk drawer, spread it out on the table in front of me, and sat down. The map showed the entire 2,000 acres of land that had been passed down to me, the acres Dad had worked tirelessly to protect and build up. It was all laid out before me, a legacy of land, of hard work, and of integrity. "All right, Dad," I muttered, glancing at the journal entries. "Let's do this." A few hours later, I called Tom, a longtime friend and one of the most capable people I knew when it came to organizing a project. Tom had worked alongside Dad on a few smaller initiatives, and now it was time for him to help me bring Dad's vision to life. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Robert, how's it going? You need something?" "Yeah," I said, pacing the length of the study. "I need you to help me with something important. It's time to get started. You still interested in working on the Thompson Land Trust?" There was a brief pause. Then Tom's voice came through with a mixture of excitement and surprise. "Hell yeah, I'm in. I've been waiting for you to make that call. What's the first move?" I grinned, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. "First things first, we're going to take those 2,000 acres and turn them into something that matters. I want to get a program started for veterans, have them do trail work, wildlife monitoring, that kind of thing. It'll give them something to focus on, something to be proud of, and it'll keep this land protected." Tom let out a low whistle. "That sounds incredible, man. All right, so we need to get some things in motion. I'll reach out to some people I know. You know the drill. We'll get the nonprofit off the ground and start raising funds." "Exactly," I said, nodding, feeling more certain with every word. "But it's more than just a project. It's about giving something back. It's about using this land for more than just profit. We're going to do this right." The conversation ended with plans in place, meetings to schedule, permits to secure, contacts to reach. But for the first time since Dad had passed, I felt like I had a purpose, something tangible to work toward. I wasn't just inheriting land and money. I was inheriting a mission. That night, I sat down at the old dinner table, staring out at the forest that stretched out before me. The house was quiet, peaceful, even. It was hard to imagine my family ever walking through the front door again, not after everything that had happened. But I wasn't alone. I had a vision. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was where I was meant to be. Right here, taking Dad's work, his legacy, and turning it into something real, something that could actually make a difference. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own way of doing things, my own purpose now. The phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. It was a message from Tom. "I've got some people on board. We'll meet next week to start planning the outreach." I smiled to myself. This was it. This was my chance to build something better than it had ever been before. For me, for Dad, and for everyone else who would benefit from the work we were about to do. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out over the land. The trees, the grass, the fields, they all seemed to stretch on forever. This wasn't just an inheritance of wealth. This was an inheritance of purpose. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally doing something that truly mattered. My father had taught me more than how to build a business. He had taught me how to build a life with meaning. Now, it was my turn to carry that forward, and I was ready. It had been a couple of months since I'd made the changes, since I'd finally put my foot down and kicked Carol and Peter out of the house. I had been busy with the nonprofit, getting everything lined up, talking to the right people, setting up the veterans programs, the land conservation efforts. The vision was becoming reality. But no matter how busy I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd be back. I knew my family. They didn't just give up easily. I expected the phone calls, the guilt trips, maybe even the threats. What I didn't expect was the message I found waiting for me one morning. It was an email from an attorney, a third party, someone I didn't recognize, asking me to meet with my sister. The subject line read, "Fresh start, let's meet." I stared at it for a few moments, trying to read between the lines. I could hear Carol's voice in my head, always so polished, always so smooth, like she was trying to convince herself of something she didn't believe. It was a trap. I knew that much. But part of me, that small part that still cared about family, wondered if there was a genuine attempt at reconciliation. After all, it had been months. Maybe they'd learned their lesson. Maybe they saw what had really happened. I wasn't holding my breath, but I replied, "Sure, let's meet, but it'll be on neutral ground. No more games." The day of the meeting came, and I drove to a small cafe downtown. I made sure to get there early. I wasn't about to let them control the situation again. I wanted to be calm, to have the upper hand, to walk into this on my terms. Carol showed up right on time, walking in with her perfect, controlled smile. Her hair was neat, her clothes crisp, the air of confidence surrounding her like a force field. She had always been that way, in control, or at least pretending to be. But something was different. There was a weariness in her eyes, an almost nervous energy to her usual composure. She looked human for the first time in a long while. "Robert," she said, her voice careful but polite, "thanks for agreeing to meet." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "I figured we should talk. But let's be clear, Carol, I'm not doing this to rehash the past. I've moved on. You and Peter, on the other hand." I let my words hang in the air. She frowned, but didn't interrupt. She sat down slowly, folding her hands on the table. "We've been through a lot," she started, her voice softer now. "And I won't pretend it hasn't been hard for all of us. Losing Dad, everything that happened with the estate, I know I didn't handle things well." I raised an eyebrow but kept my expression neutral. "You didn't handle things well? Is that what we're calling it?" She flinched slightly, but she didn't back down. I was angry, and I was hurt, Robert. You got everything, and I felt like I was being left behind. I thought if I didn't fight for what was mine, I'd lose everything." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't fight for what was yours, Carol. You fought for everything that wasn't. You didn't care about Dad's legacy or about what was best for the family. You cared about the money, the status, the appearance of success." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze down, her fingers playing with the rim of her coffee cup. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability, guilt, maybe even regret. It wasn't the Carol I knew, but for a moment it felt like I might be talking to someone real. I know I made mistakes, she said quietly. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know how to handle things. I didn't know how to deal with the way things changed after Dad was gone. I thought I deserved more. And I don't know what I was thinking. Her voice broke on the last sentence, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if it was genuine. I leaned forward slightly. Why now, Carol? Why are you apologizing now, months later? After everything that happened, what's different? She looked up at me then, her eyes clear but full of something I hadn't expected. Regret. I've had time to think, time to look at everything from a different perspective. I realized I've been chasing the wrong things, and I've hurt the people who mattered most. I didn't care about you, Robert. I didn't care about our family. I only cared about my image, about proving something. But I see now that I was wrong. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to walk out, to tell her this was too little, too late. But another part of me, that small part that still saw her as my sister, wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally gotten it. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. So what now? You're asking for forgiveness? Is that what this is? A second chance? She nodded, the sincerity in her eyes undeniable now. Yes, I'm asking for that. I've learned a lot over these past months, and I don't want to lose what we had, even if it's just the chance to rebuild something. I don't want to lose my brother, Robert. I don't want to lose the family we were. I sat there, staring at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. This wasn't some manipulative game. This wasn't about money or status anymore. This was about her finally facing the consequences of her actions and realizing that the life she'd been living wasn't fulfilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I might actually be able to forgive her. I don't know if I can ever forget what happened, Carol, I said slowly, my voice low. I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were, but I'm willing to try for what it's worth. I'm willing to build something with you, but it's not going to be easy. You've got a lot to prove. She nodded, her eyes hopeful but cautious. I know, and I'll prove it, Robert. I'll prove that I can be better. For you, for us, for the family. I studied her face, seeing the raw honesty there. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't everything, but it was a start. I'll help you, I said quietly, but you've got to show me you're ready. No more games. And with that, for the first time in a long time, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could start again. Not as business partners, not as enemies, but as family. The way it should have been all along. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt like the beginning of something new. I looked at her, nodding once. We'll take it slow, but you've got one shot. Don't waste it. Carol smiled, a real, soft smile, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like a mask. It felt like a fresh start. 1 year later, I stood in front of a modest crowd at the grand opening of the Thompson Wildlife Preserve, just beyond the edge of the forest Dad had worked so hard to protect. The crisp autumn air smelled of pine and earth, and the ground beneath my feet felt solid, like everything was finally in the right place. The crowd was small but sincere, a handful of old friends, the veterans who had joined the trail work program, some of the local wildlife conservationists, and a few community leaders who had helped us get off the ground. My hands were tucked into the pockets of my jacket, a simple outfit that fit the occasion, nothing too fancy. I didn't need any of that. I had already inherited something far more valuable than a mansion or a luxury car. A mission. I took a deep breath and looked around. The preserve wasn't just land, it was proof of what Dad had always believed in, what I believed in now. I could almost hear his voice reminding me of the importance of what we'd built. The land was meant to be shared, to be cared for, not squandered on excess. You good? Tom asked, standing beside me, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. She was one of the first veterans to sign up for the program. A tough woman, a little older, but strong. She was standing near the trailhead with a few others, laughing with some of the kids from the community who had volunteered to help restore the trails. I nodded, my heart thumping in my chest. Yeah, just taking it in. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it didn't need to be. The people who were here mattered. They understood what this meant. Dad would have been proud, I said quietly, almost to myself. Tom clapped me on the back, a reassuring gesture. He would have been, Robert. He definitely would have. We were all gathered near Dad's favorite bench, the one he had spent so many quiet afternoons sitting on, watching the trees sway in the wind, thinking over things that mattered. I couldn't help but smile as I looked at it. It was more than just a bench. It was a symbol of everything he had wanted for this land, for us. A few minutes later, I stepped up to the microphone. The crowd quieted, the murmur of conversation fading into the background. I cleared my throat, my hands resting at my sides. I want to thank all of you for being here today, I began, my voice steady but a little thicker than I had expected. This is a special day for me, not just because of the work we've done to get this project off the ground, but because it's the beginning of something that was important to my father, something he believed in. I paused for a moment, scanning the crowd. I saw Carol sitting toward the back, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on me. She was here, even if it wasn't in the way I had originally imagined. There was no grand reconciliation, no perfect family moment. But that was okay. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could stand here and mean what I was about to say. Dad always said that money's just a wrench, I continued, swallowing the lump in my throat. You don't worship it, you use it to build something. And that's what this is. This isn't about inheritance or power. This is about something bigger. It's about giving back, preserving what we have, and making sure future generations understand that the land isn't something we own. It's something we protect. I glanced over at Tom again. He gave me a nod of approval. I smiled back, feeling the weight of the moment in my chest. We're starting small, I said, looking at the group, but I know that with the help of everyone here, we can grow. This will be a place where veterans can come and find purpose. It'll be a place where kids can learn what it means to give back to the earth that's given us so much. It's about creating a community where everyone belongs, no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you've been through. The crowd was silent for a moment, and I felt the shift. I felt like we were standing on the edge of something that could be huge. Not in a flashy public way, but in a real way. The kind of work that mattered. I finished my speech and stepped away from the mic, my heart still racing, but now with a different kind of energy. It was the kind of energy that came with purpose. As I walked back to Tom and his daughter, I saw Michelle approaching. She was standing a little farther away, looking over the crowd, but I could see the respect in her eyes. She hadn't said much over the past year, but she had been a quiet support. She understood what I was trying to do. "You've done good, Robert," she said when I reached her. "I'm proud of you." I just nodded, unsure of what else to say. I wasn't doing this for her approval, but hearing it still meant something. Maybe I wasn't the failure they had all thought I was. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversations, handshakes, and laughter. There were kids running around the trails, some of the veterans talking to the volunteers about the conservation work they'd been doing. People were excited, people were invested, and I was finally starting to feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light across the preserve. I walked over to the bench, the one Dad had sat on all those years. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, the memories flooding back, the fishing trips, the talks about life, the way he had taught me to stay grounded, and now I was carrying that forward. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered quietly, my voice soft but filled with a weight of gratitude. It wasn't just the land, it wasn't just the business or the money. It was everything he had left me, the tools, the lessons, and the trust. The legacy wasn't just in the dollars I had inherited, it was in the work that had started long before I ever knew it would be mine. I turned back toward the crowd, watching as they began to disperse, everyone talking about the next steps. There was a lightness to the air, a feeling of possibility. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. And I knew without a doubt that I was building something good, something Dad would be proud of. This was the beginning. My father hadn't left me money, he had left me direction, and now it was time to build. YouTube picked this for you. Tap it, let's see if they guessed right.